The tension in the Suzuka paddock has nothing to do with setup changes or tire strategy. 3 days before the Japanese Grand Prix, Max Verstappen was 200 kilometers away at Fuji Speedway, sliding a Nissan through the rain. A 4-time world champion in a car he had never driven, on a track he barely knows, in conditions that would send most drivers back to the garage. And he was laughing. That is not a detail. That is the story. The Nissan Z Nismo GT 500 is a pure racing machine, a carbon fiber chassis weighing just over 1,000 kilograms with a 2-liter turbo engine pushing up to 650 horsepower. At Fuji in the dry, it laps 12 seconds faster than a GT3 car. But what matters more is what the car does not have. No energy management software, no battery plans to nurse through a stint. No radio calls dictating when to lift off the throttle, just a driver pushing as hard as his talent allows. For a man who has spent 3 races managing lift and coast zones and listening to deployment instructions, that cockpit must have felt like freedom. When Verstappen climbed out of the Nissan, he was smiling. That smile is why Red Bull arranged this test. It is also why they should be worried. A 4-time world champion finding more joy in a borrowed Japanese GT car than in his own Formula 1 machine is not a promotional day out. It is a warning. And what happened at Fuji is only the beginning of this story. To understand why a 4-time world champion is seeking joy in a Nissan, you have to understand what the 2026 regulations did to the driving experience. The power unit now gets 50% of its energy from the electric motor. Under the old rules, that number was around 30%. That shift sounds technical on paper. Behind the wheel, it means drivers spend more time managing battery state than racing the car in front of them. Telemetry from the first 3 races shows an average of 17 lift and coast zones per lap across the grid. 17 times a lap, drivers must lift off the throttle early to save energy for the next straight. The active aerodynamics added another layer of complexity. Cars now switch between high and low downforce configurations at precisely mapped points on the track. Miss the switch and you lose time. Get it right and you still spend mental energy that used to go entirely into car placement and braking points. David Coulthard said it on the Chinese Grand Prix broadcast. These cars are programmed, not driven. We are losing the human element that made champions like Senna and Schumacher. The weight increase seals the deal. The 2026 cars are 42 kilograms heavier than their predecessors. That affects braking distances, corner entry feel, and the direct connection between steering wheel and tarmac that every great driver craves. The numbers tell the full story. In 2025, Verstappen averaged just over 3 energy-related radio calls per race. In 2026, that number has jumped to more than 11. The car now tells the driver what to do rather than responding to the driver's commands. That is not racing. That is system management. And for a driver raised on karts where the machine was an extension of his hands and feet, the new Formula 1 feels like fighting against software rather than mastering a machine. The regulations that promised closer racing delivered a driving experience that rewards calculation over instinct, and no driver on the grid feels that loss more than the one who built his career on pure, unfiltered car control. The regulations are only half of Verstappen's frustration. The other half sits in the back of his car. Red Bull's split with Honda at the end of 2025 forced them to build their own power unit division from the ground up in partnership with Ford. The RB22 carries an engine that was never supposed to be this unreliable. In Bahrain, Verstappen lost 7/10 in the deployment zones compared to the Mercedes of George Russell. In China, the ERS cooling system began spiking temperatures around lap 30. By lap 45, the car was done. He had fought from last to 6th and then had to park it. The reliability numbers are brutal for a team that won 4 straight constructors titles. Across the first 3 races, Red Bull Ford has logged nearly 5 reliability incidents per 100 laps. Mercedes is at just over 1, Ferrari at less than 2. Christian Horner admitted after China that the interaction between the chassis and the energy recovery system has created operational constraints they did not anticipate. Helmut Marko put it more bluntly. Max is driving at 110% every weekend. The car is giving him 80%. That equation does not work for anyone. The underlying problem goes deeper than cooling systems or deployment figures. Honda's power unit architecture used an aggressive harvesting philosophy on corner entry that gave Verstappen a braking feel he mastered over 4 championship seasons. The Red Bull Ford unit uses a different approach. The result is a car that does not respond the way he expects. When a driver of his caliber cannot predict what the rear end will do on corner entry, everything else falls apart. The team sits 6th in the constructors' standings with 22 points after 3 races. George Russell leads the championship with 55. The gap between where Verstappen is and where he expects to be has never been wider. The car Verstappen drove at Fuji is the opposite of everything he fights in Formula 1. Super GT regulations allow no energy management software, no lift and coast requirements. No deployment maps dictating where the power comes in. The driver decides every input and the car responds instantly. The GT500 chassis weighs just over 1,000 kilograms, roughly the same as a Formula 2 car, but the power to weight ratio creates a window where mechanical grip and aerodynamic balance interact in ways that reward instinct over calculation. That 12-second gap to a GT3 car at Fuji is not just speed, it is a statement about engineering philosophy. Super GT manages competition through success ballast, adding weight to winning cars rather than restricting engine output or dictating fuel flow. The racing stays close without the gimmicks. Verstappen compared the category to the old Deutsche Tourenwagen Masters from the 2000s, an era of touring car racing that produced some of the most celebrated championships in history. He watched those races as a young driver. Now he is chasing that feeling. The technical director of Kondo Racing, the team whose car Verstappen drove, said after the test that most drivers need 20 laps to reach the limit in a GT500. Verstappen was there in 3. This is what Verstappen is measuring his Formula 1 car against, a category where no engineer radios the driver to tell him when to save fuel. No battery percentage flashes on the steering wheel screen demanding attention mid-corner. Just a steering wheel, a throttle, and a track. The GT500 amplifies driver input rather than filtering it through software layers. For a man who has spent 3 races fighting deployment maps and cooling issues, that Fuji test was not a day out. It was a reminder of what racing is supposed to feel like. And the fact that he climbed out of that car laughing tells you everything about what the RB22 is not giving him. The Nissan test was not a one-off. 3 days earlier, Verstappen was at the Nürburgring Nordschleife, the most dangerous permanent racetrack in the world, driving a Mercedes-AMG GT3 EVO in the NLS Endurance Series. He and his team crossed the line first. The victory was taken away after the race due to a tire pressure regulation violation. Most drivers would have been furious. Verstappen shrugged it off and flew straight to Japan for the Fuji test. Within a week, he had raced on 2 continents in 2 different GT cars while preparing for a Formula 1 Grand Prix. The calendar for the coming weeks shows the pattern escalating. He is entered for the Nürburgring 24 Hours in May, a 24-hour endurance race that falls between Formula 1 weekends. The event demands physical recovery time, travel across continents, and mental reset that directly impacts his F1 performance. Yet Red Bull has approved it. Not just approved it, but appears to be facilitating these outings with camera crews, livery changes, and full promotional support. The team is treating his GT adventures as content opportunities rather than distractions. Former Red Bull driver Christian Klein, now a television analyst, put it plainly: when a driver of Max's caliber starts filling his calendar like this, it is not because he is bored, it is because he is looking for something the F1 car is not giving him. Between March and May of 2026, Verstappen will have competed in the Chinese Grand Prix, the NLS race at the Nordschleife, the Fuji test, on the Japanese Grand Prix, and the 24 Hours of Nürburgring. That is 5 racing commitments in 8 weeks. Only 2 of them are Formula 1. The sport that pays him 60 million euros a year has become the side project. Listen to how Verstappen speaks about his future now compared to 12 months ago. In December 2025, before the season started, he said the regulations would be challenging, but he trusted the team. After the Bahrain Grand Prix, he called the cars terrible to drive. At Suzuka, sitting in front of the media, he said something far more significant. He said he does not have to only be a Formula 1 driver. He can be more things. He wants to try things now, not when he is 40. That is not frustration. That is a man rewriting his own career arc. The quote about the Nissan test carries the most weight. He told reporters that every time he climbed out of that car, he was laughing. And for him, he said, that is always a good sign. Think about what he did not say. He did not say the F1 car makes him laugh. He did not say the RB22 gives him that feeling. He said a borrowed GT car in the rain at a track he does not race made him laugh. The contrast is not subtle. It is deliberate. Nico Rosberg picked up on this during the Suzuka broadcast. When a driver starts talking about what he wants to do when he is not just a Formula 1 driver, Rosberg said, that is a man who has already visualized life outside the sport. Verstappen has a contract with Red Bull through 2028 worth an estimated 60 million euros a year. But contracts have exit clauses, performance clauses, And when a four-time world champion sits 8th in the standings while his car struggles with reliability and his team sits 6th in the constructors, those clauses start to matter. He is not saying he is leaving, he is saying everything except that. And in Formula 1, what a driver does not say is often louder than what he does. This is the part that should keep Red Bull awake at night. The Fuji test was not organized by Nissan, it was a Red Bull production. The car was painted in Red Bull colors. The camera crews were Red Bull crews. The onboard cameras, the livery change, the film team at the circuit all came from the energy drink company. They arranged for their four-time world champion to drive a car from a manufacturer they have no commercial relationship with, simply to keep him engaged. The last time Red Bull worked with Nissan was through Infiniti, the luxury division, from 2013 to 2015. That deal ended more than 10 years ago. The Honda NSX GT3 running on the same track in Red Bull colors adds another layer, driven by Igor Omura Fraga of Nakajima Racing and Red Bull Japan driver Ukiyo Sasahara. That car was part of the same promotional push. Honda was Red Bull's power unit partner until the end of 2025. The relationship remains close enough that Verstappen is still connected to them through these events. The separation was formal. The personal and commercial ties did not disappear. Here is the irony that no one in the Red Bull garage wants to discuss. By arranging these GT outings to keep Verstappen happy, they are exposing him to exactly what makes their own car feel inadequate. Every lap in the Nissan, on every hour at the Nürburgring, every moment in a car that rewards pure driving talent without software interference shows him what racing can feel like. The team that needs him to stay committed to Formula 1 is the same team that keeps handing him the keys to the exit door. They are managing his frustration by feeding his alternatives. And one day, probably sooner than anyone expects, he will choose the car that makes him laugh over the car that makes him manage battery percentages. Formula 1 has survived the departure of legends before. Michael Schumacher retired twice. Sebastian Vettel walked away on his terms. Fernando Alonso stepped out for 2 years to chase Indianapolis and Le Mans. The grid kept turning, the races kept happening, the fans kept watching. But none of those drivers left because they found more joy in another category while still at their absolute peak. None of them walked away with 4 world championships and said they would rather race a Nissan in the rain. That is what makes Verstappen different. He would not be retiring. He would be choosing. Every complaint he has made about the 2026 regulations would be retroactively validated if he left. The sport would have to answer for pushing away its biggest star by making the cars worse to drive. The financial consequences would be severe. Television ratings would dip. Sponsor interest would shift. The driver market would see the biggest shakeup since Hamilton moved to Ferrari, but the real damage would be to the sport's identity. Formula 1 has always sold itself as the pinnacle, the best drivers, the fastest cars. It's the ultimate test. If the best driver of his generation looks at that pinnacle and says he would rather race a GT car in Japan, the pinnacle argument collapses. The footage from Fuji shows Verstappen sliding through 100R corner, the rear of the Nissan dancing under throttle, the rain spraying off the tires. No radio call telling him to save energy, no battery percentage blinking on the steering wheel, just a driver, a car, and a track. He climbed out of that cockpit smiling. The question Red Bull and Formula 1 have to answer is simple. When was the last time anyone saw Max Verstappen smile after climbing out of his F1 car? The answer to that question will determine where he races next year. And right now the answer is pointing away from the sport that made him.